Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Wednesday, August the 27th. And today we have a very special treat for you. We're going to be speaking with a lady that we spoke to before, uh, Mailyn Salabarria. And you may remember that Mailyn, there she is on the video.
Hi.
Hello, Mailyn.
Mhm,
Welcome so much. And we spoke with Mailyn a few weeks or maybe a few months ago. We talked about Cuba. I recall we were talking about
mhm.
the electric crisis back then. But Mailyn, welcome, and it's a real treat, a real pleasure to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Silvio. It's great to be back. I know it's been a little while since we have sat down and have one of
Right.
these conversations. I know we always have like plenty of time and plenty of things to discuss. So I'm very happy to be back here with you and with your audience in the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's the pleasure is really mine, and I think those who know my background. I was born in Cuba, but as I was telling you off the air, you and I were born in the same island, but it was really two different planets. I mean, it was two different
Mhm,
times, the same system, but I caught the beginning of it. You
mhm.
actually had the chance to be born in it and to see it from within, and eventually left the country to pursue a life outside of Cuba. So, why don't as I said, I was actually born a few years before Castro took over, and I was 12 years old when my family left in 1964. So that's a lot of history probably for you,
Mhm,
ancient history. But it
mhm.
nevertheless, it impacted me, and I still have some memories of Cuba, not big memories because a lot of things have probably changed. But
Yeah.
I still have some memories of some places. In Cuba, El Malecón is one that I remember. El Parque, bueno, Parque Martín Ciego de Ávila, which is
Mhm,
where my mother was born. And those are memories that I have, but nothing, of course, like you who actually had to experience the system. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your life in Cuba, how you lived in that regime, and how you eventually decided to leave the
mhm.
only the only government that you knew. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your life and how it transpired?
Absolutely. Like I very often say it when I'm talking to people, whether it's on audiences, friends, interviews, you name it. I was born in Cuba and made in the US in the sense that I left in 2001 as a young adult, but I was the generation that was born, raised, and brainwashed in Cuba in the highest, like the highest point of the Soviet Union colonization of the island. That's what we used to call it. We were just like a satellite colony of the Soviet Union in the Caribbean. So it was like all those formative years in the government controlled schools from kindergarten until I finished high school, even going to the university. I actually left Cuba less than a month after I graduated from law school, never practiced law there, never registered with what would be the equivalent of the board, because had I done that, then I would be in the government databases, probably even more than what I am at this point, and they would have never allowed me to leave. So I basically voted with my feet when voting with your feet was not even a thing in modern culture and society. Back in 2001, I arrived to the United States and requested the protection of the United States government as a Cuban refugee, with my entire life stuffed in two suitcases and $200 in my pocket. And I have not looked back since then, in
Right.
case that somebody was wondering.
Right. Well, no, that's a great story. Now,
Mhm.
um, let me just bring up some things and tell me how much you remember of this. If you left in 2001, then I remember the one moment that sort of reconnected me with Cuba was Mariel,
Mhm.
and that was in 1980, actually.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you knew this or not, but Marcos Nelson Suarez, who's a Cuban here in Dallas, who passed away unfortunately a few months ago, but Marcos Nelson was a Cuban who came to the United States in Mariel and eventually
Oh.
ended up creating a newspaper here in Dallas called El Hispano News, very successful story.
Mhm.
But Mariel kind of, there I was. I had spent the 70s in the United States without any connection with to Cuba other than
Mhm.
my family or my parents. And then all of a sudden I see these boats leaving Cuba and I'm saying, wait a minute, what is going on? That's where I
Mhm.
came from. and that kind of reconnected me with Cuba in a way. And not that I wasn't before, but I. So, do you remember Mariel at all? That
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I was studying kindergarten when that happened. I remember that we were being taken out of the schools, out with our parents being taken out of their places of employments, get us in buses and go to whichever was the park or the square where you live and protest against the Yankees. And they would have, like the typical American man with the American flag hat made like in a rag doll, and they would set them on fire and all that. So yes, I do remember that as a child. Obviously, as a 5-year-old, I have no idea
right,
who
right,
or why we were
right.
protesting, who was this rag doll that they were setting on fire, or why people were living in boats. I always live in Havana, very close to the ocean, not that much near Mariel, more like the opposite side of Havana. Mariel is more to the west. I
Right.
was on the east side, like in the ugly Soviet Union type of buildings, but still it was something that it was an experience from my childhood there. I am the generation that saw remarkable turning points of the US-Cuba relationships. In many years, I saw it from that side. I was in Cuba when Maria happened. I was in Cuba when the August protests of 1994 happened, that Fidel Castro took the tanks out to the Malecón in Havana, which prompted the rafter crisis of
Right, right.
1994 when the Clinton administration was in the White House. I was in Havana when the Lian Gonzalez crisis happened. I was in Havana when the Brothers to the Rescue little planes flying out of Homestead to rescue rafters were shot down under a direct order of Raúl Castro. So I saw all that from the eyes of the few opportunities that I had. Oh, another important one. I was in Havana, and that one I saw with my own eyes when the 13 de Marzo tugboat
Right.
was sank in the Havana harbor, because I used to work right across the street, right across on the other side of the harbor where that happened. So again, I had that's my generation of
Right.
Cuba. I saw all that either with my own eyes as a witness because I was around there when things happened, or through the obviously censored and manipulated lens of the Cuban Communist Party, depending on which one was the story that they put out in the government controlled media back then.
Right. Let me ask you: were you remember when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened, which would have been in the early
Mm-hmm.
'90s, and how was that received in Cuba? All of a sudden, there was no. I mean, the Soviet subsidy was
Mm-hmm.
no longer there. In fact, it was no longer Soviet Union; it was now Russia. And do you remember any of that and the impact that it had in
Absolutely,
Cuba?
yeah. Absolutely. I was finishing middle school, getting into high school. That's where the infamous special period started,
Okay.
which again, it was the regime label or justification to actually demonstrate the utter failure of centralized socialist
Right.
economy. The only reason why up to 1991 and 90, actually it was 1991, because they did the Pan American Games
Right.
in Cuba as a show off to say, oh, we're fine, we're totally great, this and that. And right after the Pan American Games ended, was when the crash really started. And it
Right.
was just a clear life demonstration that no, the socialist economy was not working in Cuba. We just had a direct pipeline from Moscow and the Soviet Union directly to Havana, to the
Right.
point that in the rationing book, the food that we get as children, the shoes, the soaps, the toothpaste, all that was made in the Soviet Union. When that pipeline gets cut off, all of a sudden, the true colors of the failure of a centralized socially economy get out in the open. There is
Right.
no way to hide that. And that's when the so-called special period started, until Fidel Castro just changed the pipeline and switched the attention. And then the entire Cuban regime became a lead of Hugo Chavez and Venezuela.
Right.
That was the substitute for
Right.
that. So it's not that the economy improved or that things changed. They just found another host to start leeching the resources from.
Right, exactly. Well, and that of course takes you to when you came here, but that's a great story because it's the story of a failed regime that that you were born under, and you saw the failure, and you decided to leave for a better life. So thank you for that story, because I
Mhm,
think it's a
mhm,
story that a lot of people should hear. Now let's come to the current situation now in Venezuela. In Venezuela, you have, of course, the Maduro regime, all of a sudden being surrounded by, American naval forces
mhm,
in the ocean. Now, my opinion, Mailyn, is that I don't believe that you're going to see American troops in Caracas, but I do think that those naval operations are more for to attack perhaps cartel operations that there
mhm,
may be in Venezuela or even in Colombia. I wouldn't be surprised, or in some of those little islands there in the
mhm.
Caribbean that so that's where I see the military operation. I don't see it in Bolivia. I mean, excuse me, in Venezuela. I see it more in that sense. How do you see that?
I think that I agree with that. I think that the current Trump administration strategy with what is happening in Venezuela has been like unfolding in different steps, which we were talking earlier, and we can, go into details a little bit more. Reminds me a little bit of what happened with Noriega in Panama in the 80s, and they started with making official what Venezuelans, refugees, exiles, and people like you and I have known forever, that the leader of the Cartel de los Soles is Maduro, and
Right.
has always been Diosdado Cabello and the people around Maduro, the ones that are calling the shots with all the narco traffic that is, and the drug trafficking that is happening in Venezuela, in the surrounding countries. So now that we have made official what have been written on the walls for years, yes, it does make sense that it's a combination between a deterrent and this official designation. If you think about it, I mean, I don't remember the exact dates, but we can go into the timeline of the official designation of Maduro and his close group as the leaders of the Cartel de los Soles. Then a few days after that comes out the bounty of 50 millions for any information related to the location and the capture of Maduro. And then we have the U.S. Navy deployment in the areas. I agree with you. It's more like a deterrent. I don't see like a boots on the ground invasion in Caracas like we saw with Noriega in Panama. The differences in the countries and the strategies and the situations are very, very, very big, very wide differences amid all the similarities that they might have.
Right. And
Uh,
in Panama, pardon me for interrupting you, but in Panama, you also had a situation where that was an American base, military
exactly.
base, and you didn't have to bring in troops. You already had them there. So it was simply a question of, deciding, which way the troops were going to go that day.
Mhm.
And that was from a military standpoint, a fairly easy operation. My concern about going into Caracas with troops is that you're going to have confrontations with some troops loyal to Maduro, and there is going to be some street fighting, and there will be some casualties,
Mhm.
civilians, and I don't think the United States public, frankly, would support that. But I do think it is a deterrent, and
Absolutely.
and
Yeah, I
maybe
agree.
Maduro will get the message that it's maybe a good idea to accept that offer that in fact Panama made
Mhm.
of giving him asylum.
Getting him.
Panama had
Yeah.
offered, and I understand Mexico is doing the same thing, offering asylum too. So,
Yeah.
maybe that's going to be the consequence of this. And if that's the consequence, that's okay with me. Get him
Yeah.
out and
Hmm.
let is it Mr. Gonzalez, who was elected back in whenever it was, and let him run the
Yeah.
country. So I agree with you on the deterrent. Now, let me move on to another topic. Fascinating topic with what happened down in Bolivia, where they had an election for president,
Hmm.
and the two men who qualified in the runoff are
Hmm.
two candidates from the right. Do you think that was just a coincidence, or is there a message coming out of Bolivia that maybe because Paraguay also elected somebody from
Hmm.
the right,
Hmm.
and Argentina certainly did, and is there a message that maybe people
I
are
think it
starting to
is.
to get the message that this doesn't work? This
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
well
I
that's
think
good.
I think that Bolivia, what happened in Bolivia last week or the week before with the first round of the presidential elections is just like another step into a trend or a domino effect that we have
Good.
seen in Latin America. Thanks God, it's like real life examples that there is no a destiny of Latin America to be a cluster of socialism, collectivism, and centralized economies. I think that people are basically sick and tired of socialism and their garbage. We have generations of Latin Americans now that have realized that they fell for the message of equality and hope and change, and they will only deliver repression, corruption, misery, and despair. There is only that much that you can beat a dog before they walk away from you. I mean,
Right.
it's not rocket science, and I think it was really impressive to see it in Bolivia, because we all know the story of Evo Morales. He was another protege of Fidel Castro, formed and prepared, as well as Hugo Chavez, in the Leadership Academy of the Communist Party in Havana. 20 years in power in Bolivia. For people that are not very aware of like the timeline of what happened with him, his party, the MAS, the MAS, they went from dominating 70% of the legislature in Bolivia to this last election. They got one guy.
Right.
One guy. I mean, no, it was not a defeat. It was a humiliation in the
Right.
ballot box, and it was glorious to watch. So yes,
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
do think that it is a trend, and it's a trend that, granted, is not going to be an overnight solution. Bolivia, like any other country in Latin America that have been under the yoke of big government, corruption, centralized planning economy, it's gonna need time to recover. But the potential, Silvio, the potential is, timeless. There is
I
no
agree.
limit to the potential in the region. You were mentioning the examples of what Milei is doing in Argentina to curb corruption, inflation, reduce the size of government, return a great nation into a solid and sound fiscal policies. We have seen what Bukele has been doing in El Salvador with the priority of investment, Bitcoin, security. You mentioned the example of Peña in Paraguay, which have turned the economy into a complete different place, promoting property rights, free market economy, trying to attract investors to develop the country. Imagine now if we could get this kind of like trifecta of Argentina, Bolivia, and Paraguay, where the Mercosur all of a sudden is not a fancy club of socialists
Right.
that have a bunch of money, but actually a regional cooperation forum where these countries can work together, go over their historical differences, and open their markets to investment to improve and grow their economy. I mean, that would be the ideal, not only for South America, but for the entire region too.
That's right. Well, and of course, Bolivia, let me just go off the road a little bit with Bolivia, because I remember when we first came to the United States that everybody was wondering, where's Che Guevara? Where's Che Guevara? I mean, where in the world happened to Che Guevara? I remember my father used to say, we were having a family dinner, and my father would say, whatever happened to Che Guevara? He went to Africa and gave a speech, and then all of a sudden disappeared. Well, they found him, of course, in Bolivia.
Mm-hmm.
And in Bolivia, of course, he was eventually captured, and you know the story. So whenever I think of Bolivia, I think of that.
Me too.
That story of Che, and I believe, Mailyn, I believe that he is buried in Bolivia. They never actually, I mean, they
Probably.
put him in no, I think they put it, because I was watching a documentary the other day it was kind of a refresher documentary of Rodriguez, who was the CIA guy who actually captured him, and they took his remains and they buried him in an unknown grave. He is somewhere in Bolivia. His remains are somewhere in Bolivia. And I have to tell you another story about Che, and you're bringing back some memories, so I don't mean to jump around, but
no, that's okay.
I remember in 1968, I was just a teenager, and I bought this book called The Diary of Che Guevara. It was in English.
My God.
They translated The Diary of Che Guevara into English. So I remember reading it, and the Diary of Che Guevara is the story of a man who was failing. And in fact, and I think it's a true book. I don't think it was invented or anything. So I was reading about the last week or so of his life, when they didn't have any food. He was extremely sick because he was suffering from asthma and he had no medicine.
Yeah.
And these few remaining guerrillas that he had, maybe a handful, they were basically wondering, when is Fidel going to come and help us, because he kind of left them alone there. And so anyway, but Bolivia, not to get off the topic, I mean, that's ancient history, but for me at least it has that memory of the day that he was captured, and the big picture of him when he was captured. And that was kind of like one of those days that I remember from our exilio, as they used to call it.
No, but think about another coincidence. There is something in the jungle in Bolivia that doesn't agree with these socialistoid communist caudillos.
Right.
Think about what happened with Evo Morales too, when the accusations of corruption and traffic of influences and traffic of human trafficking, sexual abuse of minors happened. Where did he end up going? He sought refuge in the jungle, surrounded by drug traffickers and cocaleros that were giving him protection. So, I mean, isn't that a sweet irony, quote unquote? That's where all the communist rats always end up, hiding from the public opinion and hiding from the forums of accountability that they know at some point are going to cut up with them.
Yes, and there's a great story out of that diary that I'll never forget. Che Guevara and maybe there's like 10 men altogether, some Cubans and some people from the country. They're sort of, wandering around the mountains in Bolivia, and they see this village. They come to this village, and they show up in this village, and these people are looking at them like, "Who are you?" I mean, what are you doing? And Che Guevara says, "Well, we're here to liberate you." And one of the natives said to Che Guevara, "You mean a white man from Argentina is coming to liberate us?"
Us, indigenous people,
And I just, I just found that book fascinating. I think it's a true book, by the way. I don't think
it is. Yeah, me too. I agree. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, because just fast forward on time, and the reaction that those Bolivian indigenous in that village had when Che Guevara showed up with all his socialist garbage is really not that different from the one that we see today from the woke, privileged white, not only in the United States, but all over the world, with this white knight savior complex type of thing, coming and telling us, native Spanish speakers, "Oh no, you cannot say Latina or Latino, you need to put an X on it." And I'm like, dude, you don't even speak my language. What are you talking about? So it's really not that different. And again, it comes from a place of narcissism and arrogance.
Right. It's just, it's the woke mind, which is completely nuts. And now you have this thing, if I may, again, go off track a little bit here, and with this thing with Cracker Barrel. It turns out, and I wrote a post at American Thinker about this, and I've got another one coming out tomorrow. But it turns out that Cracker Barrel was a huge favorite of my parents. When my parents retired, they used to travel from Texas to the East Coast to see my sister. And they would always stop. And the Cuban grandmother mind. So they always stopped at this Cracker Barrel in Tennessee.
Oh, gosh.
And it was their favorite place to eat breakfast, And they would always come back, and my mother, then the grandmother of my sons, would come back and say, mira, look at these chucherias that I bought.
In the little store,
Right. And so whenever, I personally don't go to that restaurant very often, but whenever I saw that sign, that logo of the old man sitting, I would always smile, because I kept thinking of my parents.
It's memories,
Exactly. It's like a memory of, and then all of a sudden when I see it disappear, I was upset, because I was saying, come on, you're taking something from me that I mean, it's not my company. You can do whatever you want with it. But I felt like, wow, you've taken something from me. As I understand, it came back. And I think that they were given the woke, go broke thing prevailed again.
They were Bud Lighted, but
yes,
I mean,
that's it. They were Bud Lighted. That's a great line.
Granted, they are a private company. They can do as they please, but then if they're so tough to do that, they have to be tough enough to assume the consequences of their corporate decisions too.
Right. No, I agree.
By no means, I think that the problem with that company, like many other big corporations that have grown woke in the United States, trust me, goes way beyond than the logo redesign and all that. There is a lot of DEI and a lot of stuff going on, not only in Cracker and Barrel, but in other big companies in the country. We have a fellow Cuban American in Tennessee that is doing a great job exposing these companies and doing investigative reports about it too. Right. But yes, like you say, it's like, it's your company, you can do whatever you want, but I, as a consumer, I am going to, walk my walk, and I'm going to put literally my money where my mouth is. So if I don't go back and don't do it, then it's on you. It's not on me.
That's right. No, I agree. And this company, I mean, they're going to face some consequences because I think people will come back, but I hope the management doesn't come back, because they were very stupid. I mean, one of the rules you learn in business, and I'm certainly not I have enough business experience, I think, to say this, that one of the things that you learn is that you never make your customers angry on purpose. Now, exactly. you may have to make some tough decisions, like maybe raise prices or eliminate certain things, but you explain it and you say, look, I had to do this. Yeah. But you never do it on purpose. Yeah. And that's what happened here. Now you mentioned the woke, and I want to take it to New York City, because I've been wanting to ask you this question for all this time that I wanted to talk to you. And first of all, in New York City, there's what they call a Democrat socialist who wants to be governor. I mean, mayor. He did win the primary. I still think it's going to be a very contested election. I'm not sure it's over yet, but nevertheless, it does look like he's leading in the polls. And I was looking at this man and what he's saying, and I keep asking to myself, what would a person like Mailyn and somebody like that, who experienced all of this garbage from the other side, what are you thinking about somebody presenting this view of socialism as some kind of a romantic story that, my God, it's all about affordability and having grocery stores? And I remember writing an article at American Thinker saying to myself that my parents knew a lot about the government owning grocery stores, because all that my mother ever did, was stand in line to buy food. And before the so-called revolution, the bodega was just fine. It was full of food. And then after, it wasn't. So you as a Cuban who lived through this stuff. I
grew up with government-run grocery stores for 27 years of my life. So
I bet you did. So you have personal experience of what a failure they are.
Absolutely.
So how do you? I mean, you're sitting there watching TV and you hear this guy and you go, I can't believe I'm watching this, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I am at the point, like in this week, that it's like, oh my God, this guy is just the gift that keeps on giving. This is like the proverbial useful idiot that Fidel Castro and Che Guevara coined in their books about brainwashing and manipulating the public opinion to support the disaster that socialism and communism is. And I mean, I would totally expect it from a place like New York. We know that, generations of hardworking, free market-oriented, entrepreneurial spirit people that build great societies tend to render a next generation of weak men, and women, I use the word men in general, of individuals that then tend to start to look at the state like their Lord and Savior, and how the government is supposed to solve all their problems. I'm like, trust me, I come from that, and the picture is not pretty. So I think that what is happening with him, it's really nothing new, Silvio. If you think about when we talk about analysis of cultural and society, political changes, especially people like us, different generations of refugees and exiles who actually escape communism and socialism, there is nothing new with their propaganda. There is a reason why Fidel Castro have been in power in Cuba for 66 years. There is a reason why the Soviet Union did the same in Europe for so many years. They have like this, number one, they have this very fine-tuned propaganda brainwashing machines, and they start with their countries and their societies and their generations, and at the same time they deploy these parallel strategies to do the same thing in other countries outside of their country, so they can literally buy the public opinion. This guy is in part a process of that. Now, when you were mentioning earlier that we don't understand how people, from the comfort of their American lives, with New York incomes and grocery stores full of food, and they don't have blackouts, 8 hours with power and 8 hours without power, like I live in the special period. Right now, I have family right now, as we are sitting here speaking, in Cuba, in areas outside of Havana, where they're having power only 2 hours a day. So the other 22 hours of the day, they're in total blackout. So it's very easy to do that from the comfort of your privileged 1%er life in New York with that wedding that you celebrated in I don't know which country, which gave me literally images and visions of Animal Farm and how the pigs reach a point that convince all the other animals that all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. I mean, the guy is the poster child of that. And on top of that, with the latest news of the whole, weightlifting and all that, I'm just here like, oh my God, this is just another privileged soy boy that has no idea what he's talking about.
Right. I agree. And go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But to go at the whole phenomenon that you were mentioning, I think it was not that long ago, a month or two maybe, that Javier Milei had an interview with Jaime Bailey, the political commentator from Peru that has a show in Peru and one in Havana. And just roughly paraphrasing, because I cannot remember the exact words, and it was an interview in Spanish, but I think that Milei coined and explained the phenomenon masterfully. And is that, generationally speaking, regardless of how old we were when the Cold War ended and all that, not only the United States, but the entire world thought and assumed and sat back and got comfy and got lazy when the Berlin Wall fell and the entire Eastern Bloc fell. And they thought, oh, we won the Cold War, communism fell, in Europe, we're done. We won over communism and socialism, and that's it. What happens? Control freaks, communists, centralized people, we got to give them credit. They're very smart. And when they plan their strategies, they're not in reactive mode like most people are. They're not thinking about next month or next year. They're planning their strategies for generations to come. So yes, the Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet communist bloc in Europe fell, but we lost the battle against cultural Marxism in our society. And it's the same principle Milei was saying. This is the same principle when we are dealing with an alcoholic or anyone that has any type of addiction. The first step into the solution and to get cured and to solve that problem is having the self-awareness of recognizing, I lost this battle, I failed. Which are the steps that I can take to reverse this situation? We as society haven't done that because 99% of the people around us, Silvio, not only in the United States, Latin America, and all the other continents, are not in that point of the Laffer curve yet, where they have realized that, yes, communism fell like organically or physically in Europe, but we are in completely failure. We lost the battle against cultural Marxism. That's the result. What we're seeing with this guy, Manny, is the result of the victory of cultural Marxism having penetrated every single aspect of the Western societies. We're talking about education. We're talking about big governments over regulations that are asphyxiating small businesses and companies of any size. We're talking about the upfront out in the open attack against religious freedoms. We're talking about the attacks against the traditional nuclear family, and how every one of those objectives that they have put together, they all contribute to the dismantling of what we know as the Western society. And that's how the end result, or the fire, or the example, or the news cycle that you find after that phenomenon is that guy in New York, trying to get government controlled stores from the comfort of his millionaire life in New York City. I'm like, come on, man.
I mean, he's not even going to go to one of these stores, except to maybe do a show. But it does. We're going to have to wrap it up, which only means you're going to have to promise me you'll come back. But I want to bring up two things real fast. One is about you, and one is about Mandami. Well, let's talk about you first. You're supposed to be going. I saw something that you're going to Czechoslovakia, or
yes. I'm still.
Well, it's not called Czechoslovakia yet now. It's called the Czech Republic.
The Czech Republic. Yes, pinch me, because I still cannot believe it. I have been collaborating with this wonderful foundation for over a year now, the Free Cities Foundation. They're based all over the world, but they host their yearly conference in Prague the fall. And I was, very lucky to be invited to be one of the speakers. The topic or the theme for this year is voting with your feet, and I am
that's your topic.
The proverbial example of voting with your feet when voting with your feet was not a thing, when we didn't have like the networks, the concepts, and the technology for nomad living or digital living or anything like that we have nowadays. So I've been very fortunate. I'm very excited about that opportunity. I can send you the information if you want to share with your audience.
I hope that you make it public, or the video or whatever, because voting, if I was going to make a movie about your life, it would be called Voting with Your Feet. Now, so I congratulate you on that.
Thank you.
And I really hope that you share whatever you say with
people,
will, because I'd love to see it and I love to share it. Now, the other thing I want to say about Mandami, this is, two quick things about Mandami that I wanted to say before I forget. Number one is that the night that he celebrated his victory, his election party looked like a movie out of the 1950s in the South. Everybody was white. I don't know if you noticed that. There wasn't any black person or Hispanic person participating. It was like a little white convention, which tells you all you need to know about who supports this. These are basically the offspring of these wealthy people. The other thing I wanted to say about Mandami, and that is that you mentioned to me, and I've read it, that there's a fellow named Fernandez, Cuban-American entrepreneur in New York City, who is also putting his name in the race. I don't know how far he'll get. I saw him interviewed the other day. He looked pretty sharp. It may be a little too late to get in, but he offers a lot of potential as a future mayor. Let Mandani mess things up, and then Fernandez can run later and
again.
Say I told you so. But we're going to have to wrap up because time is, as you know, a limited source. But first of all, I really congratulate you for who you are, and I follow you.
Thank you.
And you're just an amazing person, because it just reminds me so much. You mentioned Czechoslovakia, by the way, and I have to tell you that another one of my experiences having come to the United States was the invasion of Czechoslovakia in '68 by then the Warsaw Pact. And I just remember that so much, that because, I felt so attached to the people of Czechoslovakia back then. Again, I was a teenager watching this and going, oh my gosh, this is communism. This is what we ran away from.
It's actually a fascinating story for you or anybody watching the show that wants to look into it. The reason why they went after Czechoslovakia is because according to the Kremlin, according to them, they were not communist enough.
Right.
They were still very invested in the arts, in classical education, in classical culture, and that didn't match perfectly with the agenda of the Kremlin, which
that's right.
By the way, it's a story that I learned after I came to the United
Well,
States
and that's what I was
because
going to ask you, because yes, I
everything,
mean,
yeah,
because Castro actually supported the invasion, if you
yes,
remember, he
everything
actually
that I ever
supported it,
heard and learned in Cuba, because obviously the invasion
right?
happened before I was born, but everything that I learned after that was a whitewash, Kremlin approved version
Right.
of the story. So
Yeah.
having the opportunity to hear and learn from what really happens for me took place after I left. Same thing with the book Animal Farm. I read it. It was the first one that I read when I came to the United States,
Isn't
but
that
has
great?
been fascinating. And if anybody that is listening to our conversation today is interested on it, I highly, highly recommend it that they
Yes.
read
Well,
or
I
seek
read that in high school. That
information
was one of the
about
books.
it.
We
Mhm.
read that book in high school. That one
Mhm.
and Brave New World. We learned those two books in
Yeah.
high school. That was part of our reading. But so anyway, I just remember that whole Alexander Dubček was the name
Mhm.
of the Czech man who wanted to reform the country. But let's
Yep.
do this. Let's do this. Uh, you go to Prague and
Mhm.
you give your presentation and you keep us posted like you do so well. You're just
Mhm.
a person to follow. And keep us posted. And I personally want to thank you so much. I know you're very busy.
Mhm.
I want to thank you so much for taking time to be with me and sharing with me your story, which is a great story. And please, thank you for your time so much, and go on
Thank
with what you're doing. I think
No,
you're
thank
doing a
you for having me. Thank
no, I
you.
think
Thank you for having me.
you're doing a wonderful
Mhm.
service to everybody in telling the story, your story, and the message that you send. So again, from my heart to you, thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining me. And I wish you the best in
Mhm.
well, I guess they call it now the Czech Republic.
Mhm.
That's what they call it now. Slovakia is actually a different country, as I
Yes, it is. Mhm.
understand. But Prague, uh, if I can just say one more thing about it, was always one of the most beautiful and most Western cities, I
It
think.
still is. I
It
have
is.
never been. It's gonna be my first time. And the funny thing is that my dad went to college in there
Oh
when
my
he
goodness.
was a
Well,
teenager. He was there. So yeah, it's good. There is a lot of points, that
yes.
converge into this opportunity, and I feel very, very
Okay.
blessed and very
I
impacted.
want to close by taking you back to when you were a teenager in Cuba, sometime
Mhm.
whenever. And if somebody had come to you and say, you're going to give a lecture in Prague about voting with your feet, and the one they were talking about is you, you wouldn't have believed it, I bet.
I would have not believed it.
Yeah. So
I would have my knee jerk reaction would have been like, what?
right,
Like
exactly.
whatever
Yeah.
whatever you're drinking today is probably really good, because
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever gonna happen. But yes, I have to tell you that it has not been an easy journey, as you probably know, but it's been a wonderful adventure. I know that there is so much more to come. I will have not changed it for anything else, and I do have more big news coming out before the end of this year, but I will leave that one for the next show. How about
Well,
that?
I want you to do is to promise me that you'll make a few minutes for us
I will.
sometime in the future,
Mhm.
because I love your story, I love your life, and it's something that touches me a great deal. Because I learned so much. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, you and I were born in the same island, but we were
Mhm.
born in different islands, politically
Mhm.
speaking, that is, and everything, and it's just amazing. But thank you for your time. You've been absolutely
Thanks.
wonderful as always.
Thanks to you.
And I hope you come back, and I wish you that you'll tell us how the trip is going to the Czech Republic, because I'm looking forward to
I
hearing your
will.
speech.
I
I'm
will.
looking
Thank
forward to it. All
you.
right. Well, thank you so much. Our good friend Mailyn Salabarria, who is Cuban originally, came to the United States disillusioned with the communist regime, and as you could see, has become into a great defender of freedom, which is what that's all about. And the people who understand or defend freedom the best are the ones who've lost it. That's something that my mother used to tell me, that we believe in freedom and understand freedom because we lost it. And that's something that Mailyn talks about. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye bye, everybody.